Auburn's draw in the SEC tournament, you could say it's perfect, but it doesn't matter if they don't turn things around.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Joining me as he does every single Monday, it is the Lindsay Crosby. You can find his stuff over at thebarnauburn.com and elsewhere. More on that later. We'll recap Auburn baseball series. Kind of interesting, kind of unexpected. Some big things happen. Do we jump on that? That's later. Who do we want to see Auburn play in their path to hopefully an SEC tournament championship? But the path makes sense, Lindsay. I mean, not too often does the number one overall seed, you look at it and it's like, oh, is this actually the best situation? I think it is. For Auburn, I think it is actually the best case scenario when you look at teams that they could play, which teams that they probably will play, and then obviously, the fact that the other side of the bracket, I think, is much more difficult than what you're having to deal with is ideal. But Lindsay, if they don't turn it around, what we've seen in the last two games is probably some of the worst outings that this team has had. If they don't turn it around, none of this matters.
Yeah, we had the conversation last week about what does Auburn do in these two games. I don't think I saw 0-2 in the cards, and they didn't play on Saturday against Alabama like they planned to go 0-2. So, I'm not going to give credit to Alabama because why, but it was a different type of energy between Texas A&M and Alabama. Sure. As Bruce said, you score 91 points, you should win the game. But yeah, they've got to figure out, here's what has gone wrong and here's what we have to fix. You notice some kind of common trends. Teams that are really good at the offensive boards, like A&M was, things like that can kind of get to Auburn. Florida's not bad in that department as well. And you kind of have to think about, okay, we've got to figure out, is that something we can live with? Can we score around that? What do we do to kind of fix that only real weakness we kind of have?
Yeah, and Bruce Pearl said this after the loss to Texas A&M, saying, hey, the plan's out there, which, it's what Florida did as well. I guess there's two sides of this. One is, yeah, that's true. I mean, duh. Like if you fill in, the blank of any team, it's like, yeah, if you're physical with them and you get more offensive rebounds, you're probably going to win. I'm a Pats fan. I cheered hard for Tom Brady while he was with the Patriots. And the biggest thing was like, yeah, but if you rush Tom Brady, he's not the same quarterback. Well,
quarterback is.
Yeah, that's the goal of any pass rush is to get to a quarterback. And that's the same thing when you talk about rebounds. Like if you rebound more balls than you do the opposing team, like your chances of winning go up. That's like if your shooting percentage is better, you're more likely to win. So yes, I mean obviously that's the case, and like you said, that does seem to be Auburn's biggest weakness. I do think there are others, and we'll talk about them in a second, but I do think that's one side of it is sure. Obviously, if you're physical with Auburn, like you're physical with any team, you're in, and they, you're able to get closer to the basket. It's gonna be a problem. The other side of this is how many teams in the SEC, the entire country can do that to Auburn. I think you have to have a very specific roster, a very specific personnel to actually be able to pull that off. And the irony of this is you're going to see more of those teams in the SEC tournament than you are the NCAA tournament. And so if Auburn goes, one and done in the SEC tournament, I mean, we all know what the narrative and the talking points are going to be. I don't know if they're entirely accurate. Context matters. What it looks like is going to matter. Mm-hmm. But, Auburn's path, we'll get more specific on that in just a second, but probably Ole Miss, probably Tennessee, and then the winner of Florida and Alabama, probably. Like that, those games are all tougher than anybody you're going to see in the first round, and probably anybody you're going to see in the second round. So people are going to use, if Auburn performs poorly in the SEC tournament, they're going to use that as an argument to say, oh, then they will perform poorly in the NCAA tournament. And I don't think that argument is founded in logic. I think it's founded in emotion, and I get it, but I can feel it coming already.
To further your point, in last year's tournament, the NCAA tournament, the first round loss. Like
after winning it, after being red hot. Right.
Yeah, it's going to come up again. It's going to come up and they're going to have that data point. I do think that Auburn doesn't necessarily need to win the SEC tournament to head some of that off. But I do think that there's going to be some of that publicly unless they do. Now, obviously, big difference in losing losing your first game and losing what would be the third game of your tournament, right? Mm-hmm. But I do think you're going to hear some of that if they don't win. And I don't necessarily think it's founded. To your point, your matchups you're going to have are going to be some of the tougher matchups that, even though you are in a great spot with where you are physically in the bracket, that is still a tougher draw than a lot of other conferences would have in their conference tournaments, right? Like you're being rewarded for winning the SEC by having a great draw, but you're also being punished because you're in the SEC and it's so much better than everybody else in the country. So you can't, if Auburn doesn't win the tournament, you can't say this whole thing was a failure, but people will do that if they don't win.
Right. And a lot of this is going to be the same people that say the SEC tournament doesn't matter, which I disagree with. I think the SEC tournament does matter. I think it's a chance for you to hang a banner. But what? Yeah. But
they're only going to say it doesn't matter if Auburn wins it. If Auburn wins the SEC tournament, obviously the conference tournament doesn't matter. What you do in the NCAA tournament matters. But if Auburn loses, especially if they lose early, the context is going to be this team peaked in February. They can't even win their own conference tournament. They're doomed in the big dance. That's going to be, just so you know, that's what's coming.
Well, and if they fall short in the big dance, like that narrative might be true. It's just I don't think we fully know what the truth is there. But just to circle back, Lenardi's bracketology, which I mean he's the biggest name. I don't think he's the most accurate, but it was the easiest to pull up here. Auburn is slated to host or take on the winner of SIU, Edwardsville, and American.
Real quick, where's American University?
It's in our great state, great country. I'll tell you that right now.
Nobody even knows.
I assume SIU Edwardsville is in Indiana.
I'm thinking the I in SIU. That sounds like an Indiana or an Illinois city.
Yeah, and then they'll play the winner of Memphis and West Virginia in this. And once again, like I think Ole Miss is probably better than both of those teams, and that's who Auburn's going to probably play in their first action in the SEC tournament. So once again, like the context of all of this matters. Could Auburn be playing their worst basketball of the season? Sure. Could they also have played a Texas A&M team on the road right after they locked up the SEC and they didn't play Denver Jones and it didn't really feel like that intense? Yes. And also they played an Alabama team that could be a top 3 team in the country. I think they are. I think it's Auburn. I think it's Florida. I think it's Alabama. And right now you can put them in whatever order you want. And I'm not going to push back on it. And then I think it's Duke and Houston. But, maybe that's SEC bias. I don't know. I kind of think the tape and the records and the resumes speak for themselves. So who do we want Auburn to play? Who do we want Auburn to play in their path here in the SEC tournament? We take a stab at that next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Supply House. Lindsay, there are a lot of houses in the world, but Supply House is the best one. And you can get the supplies you need from the site made for skilled trades. That is Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, if I want plumbing stuff, where do I go?
Supply House. Duh.
If I want electrical work, stuff for electrical work, where do I go?
Supply House.
If I want stuff for HVAC, where do I go?
It's gonna be Supply House. Listen, the ranking of houses: supply, waffle, 50 feet of crap, everything else.
Okay, I'm fine with that. If you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service. So you'll always talk to a real person. You got to love that. And they also have their free Trade Master program, which offers exclusive perks like dedicated phone lines and free shipping, discounts, and more. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's over at supplyhouse.com. Lindsay, if you had to order furniture, where are you going?
Wayfair House.
Wayfair. Wayfair. They've got everything
For your
everything you need. I mean, 95% of the furniture and decor in our house is from Wayfair. Your home should reflect your style, and with Wayfair, it's easier than ever to make that happen. Whether you're looking for a simple refresh or tackling a big home project, Wayfair has everything you need in one place. Wayfair's huge selection makes it easy to find the perfect piece, no matter your space or your budget, from cozy furniture to stylish decor to kitchen essentials, and also outdoor must-haves. Wayfair has it all. Head over to wayfair.com and find something that fits your style. That's Wayfair, WAYFAIR.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Looking ahead, Auburn will play Friday at noon, start things off on Friday, and they will play the winner of the Thursday noon game, which is Ole Miss awaiting the winner of the Wednesday noon game, which is South Carolina and Arkansas. So you're probably getting an Arkansas-Ole Miss battle, and kind of a toss-up. I think Ole Miss has been better consistently throughout the entire season. Arkansas, just depends what game you watch on how what you think of the Arkansas Razorbacks. And I mean, if I had to guess, I think Auburn will play Ole Miss. But if I had it my way, I would like to play Arkansas after they've played 2 games in a row in 2 days, because I think that advantage would go heavily towards Auburn's direction.
The good news here is, and that's the reason we talked about it being a great draw, is you've beat all of those teams this season. You beat South Carolina by 3 in South Carolina, right?
Yep.
You beat Arkansas by 7 at home.
Right.
You beat Ole Miss. I want to say that was by like 30 at home.
Yep.
And
beat them on the road too. Yep.
By 10 in their house. So I'm going to say it doesn't really matter who you play. Getting the number 23 team for a third time and, knock on wood, beating them for a third time does help you answer any sort of questions that could be lingering out there about should you be the number 1 overall seed. Absolutely does help with that from a resume standpoint. Yeah. But all 3 of these teams, you've beat all 3 of these teams. And despite some of these scores, some of these games weren't necessarily as close as they sound.
Especially the Ole Miss by 10 one. I agree with that for sure. And then South Carolina was an interesting one. I mean, South Carolina barely lost like all of their home games, it seemed like. So it wasn't just an Auburn thing. And then, Arkansas, once again, just a weird team, a weird situation. One of John Calipari's worst teams since he's been coaching in the conference. But like I said, there's a few nights where they just pop. And so they're a tricky team. So then on the other side of this, assuming Auburn beats Ole Miss or Arkansas or South Carolina, whoever it is, they'll probably play the winner of Tennessee and Texas A&M. My guess is Tennessee. I think the gap between those teams, despite them being a 4 and a 5 seed, I think Tennessee is significantly better than Texas A&M. Maybe not from a resume standpoint, maybe not from an SEC standing standpoint, but just eye test, Tennessee seems like a much better basketball team. Also glad that they get to play each other and beat the crap out of each other, probably, assuming Texas A&M beats the winner of Texas and Vanderbilt. I think they will. A Texas A&M Tennessee matchup, that's got to be the most boring and hard to watch basketball game you will ever see. But as an Auburn fan, especially if Auburn wins the game slot right before that, you should love it, because it's like, man, they got to play whoever wins that game the following day, and they are going to be in a battle with each other between Texas A&M and Tennessee, 2 physical teams that will rough the other one up. So I just like how that falls, and especially if Texas A&M is to quote unquote upset Tennessee, that'd be then A&M's 3rd game in 3 days. I don't know. I like the draw. I like the draw here for Auburn.
Yeah, I think if you're the type of person who is freaked out by the fact that Auburn lost to A&M last week, you obviously have the advantage of, hey, they may not even get there, but 2, they may get taken down by Tennessee. And you have shown it was a very close game, but you have shown that when a lot of things go poorly, you can still beat Tennessee. You took them down by 2 on a Saturday with game day here, despite
Crazy
a lot of
game.
things not going right in that game.
Crazy game.
That was wild. Yeah. But again, another situation where you don't and other than A&M, you probably don't have to play a team that you lost to until you get pretty far along in the tournament. And I think actually the final round probably. So the championship. So feel good about that. But I wouldn't sleep on either A&M or Tennessee. And to your point, you really need those two teams to just beat each other up. It needs to be the equivalent of that 3-2 college football game that was just terrible to watch. That's what it's going to be like trying to watch that game. It's going to be awful to watch, but hopefully it runs like double OT. Probably would be like 45-43 in that case because they're just terrible, low-scoring offenses that are boring to watch. And then Auburn would be in a good position of you guys played, in essence, an extra game in overtime before you face us the next day. So,
I mean, that's always best case scenarios. You always want the team that you're about to play to go to overtime in this situation for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's better for Auburn to play Texas A&M in the situation for 2 reasons. One, I think the revenge factor will be there. And that's kind of, I mean, I said this going into the Alabama game, but when this team is doubted is typically when they play their best ball. Mm-hmm. Wasn't the case Saturday, but I do think that's still who they have been over the course of the season. But also, Texas A&M will be playing their 3rd game in 3 days if that were to happen. And I think that'll matter. I think that'll matter for sure. And then as far as like just how Auburn's situated as the 1 seed, the fact that they don't have to play Florida or Alabama until the SEC championship, I think is the ideal situation here. And you probably want those 2 teams to play each other again because we saw them play each other last week. Yeah, last week. And that was it was an incredible game. But yeah, you kind of want them to play each other before you play them, hopefully in the SEC championship.
Yeah, that was 99-94 Florida. So they won by 5. But I feel like that one was closer than maybe
and Florida was out by a good bit, and then Alabama stormed back. So
I do also think there's a little bit of motivation for Auburn in some of this because Ole Miss coach Chris Beard said that Florida deserves the number 1 overall seed. So I do think if you get Ole Miss, Auburn's going to really that's the bulletin board kind of thing that you look for. It's kind of like how the Philadelphia Phillies manufacture grievance all the time. That's the thing you can use to just go out there and blow them out if you happen to get them. I just wanted to throw that in there because I saw that and I was like, let's just make sure we mention this.
So yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we'll see. We'll certainly, I'm sure Auburn Twitter will be all over that if that game happens. So,
oh yeah.
All right. So yeah, I think Auburn's in a good spot, but you got to win the first one. You got to win the first one and kind of send the message that, who you were the last week of the season isn't who you are because you got to prove people wrong at this point. You got to prove people wrong. Auburn baseball takes 2 out of 3 this weekend against Old Dominion, including a controversial call on Sunday and kind of a collapse on Saturday. What does that mean moving forward as conference play is just a week away? That's next right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Can you imagine wagering anywhere other than with our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, Lindsay Crosby?
I could absolutely never do it, and I never would, and do not go listen to other podcasts I've done where I've done other reads. I would only bet with FanDuel.
Yeah, so right now, Auburn is a 1.5-point favorite against the Baylor Bears. That game has been moved to a Friday, which is very, very fun. Very, very exciting. Also, if you still believe in this Auburn team, like we do, you can bet on them to win the national championship. Odds shifted a little bit at plus 380. You also can bet on them to win the SEC tournament at plus 150. And right now, new customers. Yes, Lindsay?
One more. Auburn Tigers to make the College World Series plus 8,500.
All right. I feel like those are better odds than they were a few weeks ago. So
they are.
Head over to FanDuel right now. New customers, you can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 in bonus bets to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Please be the Auburn Tigers. Visit FanDuel.com to get in on the action all tournament long. That's at FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Final few minutes of today's edition of Locked On Auburn. Lindsay Crosby hanging out with us. Auburn baseball wins 2 out of 3 against Old Dominion. Blast them 10-4 on Friday. Has a major collapse, gives up the game on Saturday, and then a controversial call on Sunday. We'll get to that in a second. But Lindsay, I think the biggest concern or the biggest question that the average Auburn baseball fan may have, or maybe even somebody who hasn't quite shifted their focus from basketball to baseball just because of the timing of it all, which I think is going to be a big chunk of people, but maybe they see the headlines or the chatter on Twitter. I mean, Auburn had a massive lead. It was going into the 7th inning, and it just seemed like after that, they just totally blew it on Saturday. What happened? And is this a one-time thing, or is this something to be concerned about?
So they were up 9-2 going into the 7th, and it was a very kind of cold night there in Plainsman Park. Sure. And long story short, your pen just kind of had trouble locating pitches, right? It felt like everybody that they brought in, and Auburn between the 7th and 8th inning, Auburn used 4 different pitchers, right? Allowed, I want to say it was allowed 9 runs, took it from a 9-2 lead to 11-9 deficit. They just struggled to locate the zone with anything that moved, right? Any sort of breaking pitch. And so you kind of came down to, you just got to group some fastballs, and Old Dominion hit them. I think 2 things can be true at once here, right? Like, you're going to, it's normal to lose a game on a weekend, right? It is absolutely normal to lose a game on a weekend on a 3-game series. Hard to beat any team 3 times. This wasn't the best showing from the bullpen. And I'd argue the offense got a little bit quiet too. After the starter left the game, Auburn had 1 hit the rest of the game. Now they still drew 6 walks, right? But no runs, 1 hit the rest of the game.
Right.
I think this was just one of those weird games where I'm not worried about it, provided it doesn't happen again, right? You had 2 things go wrong at once because the bats got quiet and the pitcher struggled with the zone.
Right.
I think this team's good enough to get past one of those 2 things. The question is both of them. I do think something else that comes into play that nobody's really talking about, but I think I'm going to kind of mention this here, is
Please.
Ike Irish left the game late after being hit by a pitch. He took it kind of not quite the small of the back, but like solidly in the back, and ended up having to leave the game. And they replaced him with another catcher, Cale Strickland, who has not played a lot this season. He's a good defensive catcher. He's not played a lot. And so I think that may have been part of the issues with the pitching, because unlike a lot of schools, Auburn catchers and they call their own games. It's not coming from the dugout. It's coming from the catcher. He had to rush and get in the game, may have been out of sorts, things like that a little bit. I'm not as concerned about this, provided it doesn't happen a second time.
Sure.
And I'm still optimistic that when this team faces off with Vandy this upcoming weekend, it's your pitching's in a good place for 2 of your 3 starters. I feel good about what the offense has been able to do. And I feel like that's definitely you can win 2 out of 3 in that series.
All right, let's spend just a second on Sunday's game. Auburn won 7-3 in the rubber match to win the series.
Yeah.
Controversial call. Clearly a home run. They say, no, it wasn't a home run. Thankfully, Auburn still won the game. But
yeah,
I mean, did you ever hear anything about that? It's kind of set the scene for us there.
Okay, so it's the bottom of the 3rd, runner on first, and shortstop Derek Fabian, who has been awesome this year. 2nd year in after transferring from Florida. Launches one to left center. And we have the War Eagle wall, and then it kind of comes down at an angle before it goes into the normal wall.
Right.
And behind the wall, where there's a yellow line and everything, is one of the metal walkways to get to the new seating area up there. So the ball hits the metal walkway and caroms back into the field of play. He's taken off. He's running. Right as he gets about to third base, they call a home run. So he jogs into home, and then they go review it. And on review, you can clearly see the ball goes over the wall and hits the railing. But for some reason, they put him at second base. It's the television broadcast was confused. The radio broadcast, Brad and Andy, Andy's practically yelling into the microphone, like angry about it. The press box, the analytics booth, like nobody knew what happened. I emailed the league office, and as of time of recording, they have not yet gotten back to me with an officiating explanation of what the call was, because ground rule double doesn't make a lot of sense. The ball didn't touch in the ballpark and then bounce out.
Right.
It's just they ruled the play dead. They put him on second base, Fabian, even though he was at third when they signaled home run. It probably wasn't inside the Parker because the ball caromed off and went all the way past the center fielder, like to the batter's eye. So,
I mean, it felt like a ground rule double, but that's not what it was. But I felt like that's what they ruled it as.
That's in essence how they treated it. Yeah.
Super bizarre.
Yeah. Now Fabian took care of business later. He hit a home run, 2 left over the monster that was clearly over.
Call this one back, guys. Call this one back. Yeah.
The analytics team, shout out to those guys. They had a great tweet about it from their account, and they said the baseball gods are just, right? He got the home run that he actually hit and didn't get credit for.
Yeah.
And it really kind of felt like that galvanized the boys a little bit. They Auburn, just from that point on, they just really kind of handled business in that game, and it was ended up being 7-3, and it's not even as close as that made it sound. Old Dominion got a homer in the 9th to make it a little bit close. It was 7-1 going into the 9th. Auburn had 13 hits and just ran over him in the finale.
So UT Martin tomorrow night. That's up in Huntsville, right? So then I
love how they do this real quick. This is in the ballpark of the Rocket City Trash Pandas.
Right.
So if you live up there in Huntsville, tickets are still available. You can go buy them. I love that they do this. Auburn fans in North Alabama can go see the team play.
Yeah, I think it's great. They do this stuff in Montgomery as well. So I think that's cool. It's cool. All right. So they start conference play. They host Vanderbilt this weekend. I mean, Vandy, one of the more, consistently competitive, teams in all of college baseball. I was about to say the SEC, but it's larger than that. So, what are your expectations? What is Auburn like? What do their goals need to be in this?
I feel like Auburn's going to this should be a 2-1 weekend, right? You should win the series. Both teams have 3 losses. Auburn's 3 losses are all kind of in non-con play to smaller programs who stole one of the 3, right? You did lose a midweek in there. Vandy's 3 losses on paper are better. They lost to Nebraska, who's a ranked team this year. They lost to UConn and they lost to USC. USC West, not USC East. And so on paper, their losses are better, but a lot of their games are lower scoring games outside of when they've just brought in a tiny school and blown them up, right? Air Force, 3-1, 5-2. A lot of these weren't dominant wins, whereas Auburn's been able to have those dominant wins. I feel good about they've seen pitching that's similar to this. They've seen defense that's similar to this, and Vandy has to play in an actual ballpark in Auburn and not their tiny little bandbox. So I feel like this should be a 2-1 weekend for Auburn. My question is, Cade Fisher's been up and down on Saturdays a couple times now. Can he rebound and have a SEC caliber start on Saturday, or do you need to have somebody lined up behind him to take some bulk innings like a Cam Tilley?
Yeah, that'll be fun to watch for sure. And it'd be really fun to see Auburn go 2-1 to start conference play. Right. Lindsay, how can people check out everything that you've got going on?
We're previewing Auburn baseball. We're talking about these games, the Barn Auburn, the message board, and then the Barn Baseball Show. Me, Brad Law, second to Shara. You can also check out the Atlanta Braves coverage, bravestoday.com. All of this stuff is on the Twitter account at Crosby Baseball.
Yeah, please like the video, please subscribe, and we'll see you next time. This has been Locked On Auburn.